Now, we live in an era where both shame and shamelessness seem to sell. People who are willing to behave in ways that are cringy or embarrassing or humiliating to other people are actually monetizing it quite well. Witnessing people being shamed in public have become our modern gladiator games. Seeing people get upset because they were baited is now considered entertainment. Sometimes I allow myself a moment, when I'm taking a break, to swim in the swamp of the comment sections of various news articles I'm reading. I'm always kind of curious about what the world thinks about a given issue, especially when it's got a narcissistic vibe. In this particular case, it was an article about a woman who's being bullied because she went online and she shared a very meaningful accomplishment in her life. It's just what social media is. She was nothing, like really, she'd done something quite spectacular and she was sharing it. The comments on this article were brutal, not on the social media, on the article. And people were calling her narcissistic because they were saying, well, here we are, one more look at me person. And that their comments were a great reminder of how misused this word narcissism is. Because narcissism is not just about posting to social media or even drawing attention to oneself, right? Just because a person posts vacation pictures or their upgraded fancy first-class airplane seat or their Eggs Benedict or their before and after weight loss photos or their Christmas tree or their new shoes or their holiday roast or their vacation to Hawaii or their new dress or their kid graduating from kindergarten, right? Even if they post a lot of that stuff, even if it seems that they just want people to keep seeing their lives and comment on it or like it, it doesn't mean that they're narcissistic, okay? They may be annoying, but they're not narcissistic. Now, the idea that the look at my life or look at me or even pick me makes someone narcissistic is patently wrong, okay? If you came up to me and said, ugh, Ramani, look at my friend's social media. Like, look at this. Or look at my ex's social media. It's pictures of their hike and then pictures of their abs and pictures of their trip. How narcissistic are they, right? Now, I wouldn't nod my head and say, they sure are. I'd say, tell me more. Because if all you have on someone is the look at me, maybe. But there could be other things that explain this. The person posting all this stuff could be insecure. They could be bored. They could just be a regular person who likes to take pictures and share them. They could be a person who likes looking at other people's pictures too. So they consider it something reciprocal and they're fine, even if nobody likes theirs. People who just could be lonely. They could be attention seeking. Could be a lot of things, right? We don't know. We may never know unless we know them. And they may not even have good insight into their why. And sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. And they post the picture because it's pretty or it's fun or it was a good memory. And they just want to share it. And there's nothing sinister or odd or weird happening. But for us to be able to say that their Sunday brunch picture with the perfect little mimosa glasses or the picture of them like, look at me in Miami, for that person to be narcissistic, folks, there's got to be a lot more going on, and you're not going to be able to glean that from a picture. You'd also have to be able to show that they've had consistently variable, self-serving empathy, be grandiose, entitled, arrogant, be pathologically selfish, put themselves ahead of everyone and everything, but still talk about themselves as though they are so good to everyone. They'd have to show poor frustration tolerance and dysregulated emotions and have an excessive need for attention and admiration and consistently be engaging in relational behaviors such as manipulation, betrayal, the willingness to use other people. You'd have to have all that other stuff, right? They'd have to be gaslighting, right? Just posting pictures to share a life doesn't qualify as excessive attention seeking, right? Which is a part of narcissism. You gotta dig deeper. They're just posting a picture. Now, why does this matter? Why do I care? Because it's not like I'm looking at people's social media. Why does it matter? Well, let me tell you it matters. It matters for a few reasons. First, it matters because in saying that this person, who's posting these pictures, you may be painting someone with an inaccurate and really an unfair brush. A person who is just a decent, psychologically safe person who may just like posting stuff on social media, them being written off as narcissistic, it's not accurate. And by doing that, saying, ugh, I don't want to have anything to do with them, it could actually mean losing a decent person from your life on the basis of their posting habits. If this person who posts these pictures are an empathic, well-regulated, honest, and agreeable person, but maybe just, I don't know, whatever their reasons are for posting, they're social media centric, they're young, they're a little immature, it may not be worth losing them because they like to take pictures of how proud they are of how the cake they baked turned out. The second reason this is problematic is because making this term narcissistic just about a person sharing and perhaps enjoying attention in a world that's sort of the arc of the world right now, means, though, that the people who are genuinely in narcissistic relationships, genuinely being harmed in relationships with people who have actual narcissistic personality styles, it actually minimizes their experience. And the people who are in those narcissistic relationships then end up being viewed as making too big a deal out of what's happening in their relationship because the world at large thinks that they're just complaining about a person who shares videos of their abs. Narcissism ain't that. It could be, but there's a whole lot of other stuff that's happening. Third reason, because the people who may be doing something as harmless as just posting a cute little video of their cat and them playing with their cat, and who may find this something that they enjoy, and they're decent people, they may end up feeling bad about themselves and doubt themselves. And that's not a good thing. We don't want people to feel that way. A fourth reason is because the issue, there's an issue in narcissism. In narcissism, we're talking about an excessive need for admiration and validation. It's one of the criteria we consider in the long list of things that makes a narcissistic personality narcissistic. Again, just one thing in a longer list where you need to have most of the things on the list to really qualify as being narcissistic. And the word excessive is the key here. Wanting to share some good news in a person's life, like a new car or a new sweatshirt, I don't know that that's excessive. But since the attention seeking, and yes, at times it may be showing off, might feel in your face, right? Because it's right there in your feed. We may want to jump on it and say, the person's narcissistic. Not necessarily, right? And then fifth, we need to consider their reaction of the person posting these pictures to their pictures, and if they don't get validation for them. So if your friend or family member or partner is getting visibly angry at you or the world or lashing out at folks because they feel that not enough people are looking at their posts or validating their posts or liking their pictures, that's very different than someone who posts and then if people like it, then they like it and that's it. That person who gets angry that nobody's looking at their stuff and nobody's liking it and telling them how amazing their sandwich is. All right, I'll hold some space for that. Might be leaning into the antagonistic neighborhood. Or the person who posts and then doesn't care whether you like it or not, then it's very, very unlikely to be narcissism. Even if they post things 10 times a day, but they don't care if you see it or not. A sixth thing to keep in mind, if it was this simple, that people who post pictures are narcissistic on social media, then honestly, this wouldn't feel like abuse. It might feel annoying, it might feel immature, it might feel ridiculous or boring or at times a waste of time, but it wouldn't be leaving us self-blaming ourselves or walking on eggshells. We don't feel unsafe because a friend or a family member or a partner posts a video of them baking brownies on a snowy day or going to Las Vegas. In a real narcissistic relationship, an attention-seeking social media post, if that's one of the things that's happening, I don't know, maybe that's going to result in an eye roll at best from you. You have much bigger fish to fry than their Instagram feed if you are in a narcissistic relationship. In an actual narcissistic relationship, we are indoctrinated to silence ourselves, not express our needs, live in a chronic sense of guilt and shame, and live in an exhausting hypervigilance of feeling not enough, trying to get it just right, or living in fear of the next betrayal or tantrum. That is not about you reacting to their look at me social media posts. One of the grand ironies, though, is that some of the folks who are the quickest to accuse people who post stuff to social media regularly of being, oh, look at me, they're so narcissistic, people are literally often the people who have vulnerable narcissistic traits. That is very interesting to me, right? They were victimized, antagonistic profiles, right? It's as though the very people who desperately need and crave attention the most are the ones who are the most envious and competitive with the people who are just sharing the good stuff, or sometimes the strange stuff, or sometimes even the sad stuff of their lives. And then these folks with these vulnerable traits are the ones who are most likely to lash out and call this person who is posting and sharing that they're doing something fun, or maybe celebrating something, or just living life. They're the ones who are likely to call them narcissistic and somehow bad. We sometimes tend to see this, let's call people who post on social media, look at me, attention seekers, and then call them narcissistic. We often see that theme from folks who tend to run more victimized and passive aggressive, and again, who have that kind of vulnerable narcissistic vibe. People with more of these vulnerable narcissistic patterns have what we call aggrieved entitlement. They feel entitled that they have a right to a fabulous life, and they get pissed as hell when that fabulous life doesn't materialize. Jealousy is very close to the bone for folks with that vulnerable narcissistic style. And so calling out folks who might share their lives or their accomplishments and calling them narcissistic, that tracks with that style. So listen, our own personal insecurities can get pinged by other people's lives on social media. I get that. Listen, personally, I'm going to tell you, it's why I'm not on it for personal stuff. I don't use it. I haven't really looked at it in any meaningful way for about 10 years. I got too much of my own shit to deal with. So when my morning is burning down and the grief once again has the best of me and my pants don't fit right, seeing someone talk about or post about living their best life, climbing a mountain, talking about joy, and making a smoothie out of their vegetable garden is honestly more than I can deal with before 8 a.m. But I also own that that's a me thing. Good for them for doing that, right? But that's a me thing. I don't want to look at it. Especially when I know that person's actually a decent person. Good on them for living that healthy life. Right now, I just don't need to see it. Doesn't make them narcissistic. But we have to be careful that we don't allow those biases to lead us to toss this powerful and useful, frankly, descriptive term of narcissism too simplistically, and not only potentially hurt folks or burn down relationships that matter, but that also shame survivors of real narcissistic relationships. Listen, if their Eggs Benedict on the beach after their 5-mile jog isn't working for you right now, then hide their posts for a minute or just ignore them. But let's all be careful before we just write that stuff off as narcissism. At some level, we all want to be seen, right? Because if it was that simple, that posting pictures was what narcissism was, trust me, folks, this channel wouldn't exist. Rage baiting is when content creators deliberately post content that's polarizing, that pisses people off to get traction, to get audience engagement, to get interest, and hopefully to go viral. That's what they want. Well, if you have been in a narcissistic relationship, you have been living in a rage bait universe long before it was the word of the year and long before it was a content creator thing. I found it fascinating that when it became a sort of larger phenomenon, almost something more sociological, a content, podcast, social media thing, that it got a word or a term. Let me tell you, this deserved a word a long time ago. The content creators who rage bait, they may or may not be narcissistic. I have no idea. They may just simply want to make money and become more famous. And since rage baiting content does very well, people tune in, they share it, news outlets talk about it and clutch their pearls and say, oh, can you believe it? And again, this is often content that is so polarizing that it ultimately gets what the content creator's goal is, which is numbers. And the numbers typically translate to dollars. Now, I have no doubt that some of the folks who do this and probably do this very well might have a little bit of a narcissistic streak that goes just beyond the tactical money, analytics, numbers of it all. And it's also about their need for attention. But also, the narcissistic gratification comes from pissing people off and getting a strong reaction from them. This dynamic allows that rage baiter to feel powerful and even superior. And everyone else is like, ah, and foaming at the mouth. And then the narcissistic content creator can laugh at them and say, oh, calm down. Again, you know this if you have ever been in a narcissistic relationship. You get baited, you get frothed up, and they're like, oh, please, you need to calm down. Rage baiting is a standard part of most narcissistic relationships, especially when the power feels imbalanced. The narcissistic person doesn't like that power imbalance because it's not in their favor. They will say something that's inflammatory or hurtful that you feel you have to defend, to address, to push back on, to fight. The standard guidance that I give and many of us give on how to manage a narcissistic relationship, you know my don't go deep, right? Don't defend, don't engage, don't explain. You know the drill. So if you do that and you hold the line and you don't get into it with them and you don't give them supply, over time, the relationship gets to be relatively unsatisfying for the narcissistic person and actually kind of unsettling because now they don't feel as much power, right? But you getting upset, you getting into gaslighted arguments, that's the bread and butter of a narcissistic relationship. So as you become a cooler customer, a little bit more gray and yellow rocking, you not taking the bait, staying calm, not sharing stuff with them, not engaging, well, that's not going to work for them. So they will bait you. Or perhaps, as Oxford University Press suggests it, is they will rage bait you. You may do the yellow, gray, rocky things. You may give your one-word answers. You will choose not to get into the mud with them. You won't respond to their inflammatory message on a group text or social media. You won't call them out. So then they kick it up. And they start insulting and going at things that actually do matter to you, whatever that is. It could be going after your kids, your work, your friends or family, your values, your beliefs, anything you protect that matters to you, like I said. The uncanny thing about narcissism is that for people who don't seem to care about you, they have studied you very carefully, and they know exactly what will set you off. And instead of protecting those vulnerabilities in you, despite saying they care about you, they weaponize those vulnerabilities. And they know exactly when to deploy them to hurt you. It's actually a very, very painful experience. Rage baiting within a relationship works just like that. If you aren't giving the narcissistic person enough of a fight exactly when they want it, or at a time when the narcissistic person doesn't feel in control because of something else that's happening, they will often rage bait. And another way that this can work is that they might rage bait you right before you have to do something that matters to you. Or perhaps an event of some kind where you may be the focus of attention. I don't know, something like your birthday party or something like that. And they will sometimes rage bait right before such an event or occasion, right? They might bring up a painful, unresolved conversation that you really didn't want to think about then. Or deliver you a zinger at you that gets you out of a happy or at least a looking forward to what I'm going to do mindset and into something that sits really heavy and icky in your chest. You may not even become enraged at them, but now you just feel thrown off and may even have your event, your day, or whatever, feel like it's ruined because you're kind of stuck in this dark loop of thinking about this issue they brought up. This kind of a rage bait may also happen when you're at a precarious time at work. For example, right before a major deadline or a performance or an exam at school or for a job or something like that. And just as you're settling in, maybe to work on something important, then bam, they'll get that little rage bait thing in there that doesn't sit well. And now you find yourself stuck in a rumination loop, thinking about that thing they said or reacting to that. And then you may not meet the deadline or be really distracted as you try to, or you may not do as well at the performance or the exam. Rage baiting, or frankly any baiting, may also involve the narcissistic, antagonistic person doing or saying something that upsets or angers you. You have a strong reaction like, "Wow, how could you say this?" And then they laugh at you. This may often happen in front of other people, which is meant to kind of kick up the humiliation piece. You might be told, for example, you don't have a sense of humor. And it almost feels like adolescent locker room bullying at that point. Narcissistic people love to provoke. It's what they do. Again, it really keeps the power where they need it to be. However, at the same time, people with these personality styles are very thin-skinned and perceive other people as provoking them when the other people actually aren't. They're just sort of living their lives. And as a result, even under non-antagonistic conditions, narcissistic people can be quite argumentative. They're either provoking or feeling like they're being provoked. And this is not just restricted to adult relationships. Any of you who grew up with a narcissistic parent knows that narcissistic parents provoke and bait all the time. And they either laugh at you or tell you to toughen up or tell you that you are being ridiculous or dramatic or too much, or they may provoke you. You have a reaction, as we often do when we're provoked, and are then angrily told to stand down and obey your parent, who, by the way, was the immature piece of shit for provoking you. Narcissistic parents use this provocation technique to almost train children to abandon themselves and live in complete obedience to them. And in cases of a bullying parent, especially a bullying dad, who may have more physical strength or who may have used physical violence, it can happen with a mom too, I know that, or even threats of physical violence with a child who is younger. Well, one day, that kid gets big enough to fight back. Then the narcissistic parent may turn to less of the physical threats and more of the provoking kind of baiting to keep their now probably adolescent child feeling small. The end game is always the same. That the narcissistic person has to be the all-knowing, powerful one, and as long as we keep ourselves small, the relationship works for them. It keeps going. It doesn't really work for us, but it does keep going. I don't know that I call that the relationship working. Now, we live in an era where both shame and shamelessness seem to sell. People who are willing to behave in ways that are cringy or embarrassing or humiliating to other people are actually monetizing it quite well. Witnessing people being shamed in public have become our modern gladiator games. Seeing people get upset because they were baited is now considered entertainment. And these things often mean that everyone in the world at large becomes less empathic. We run the risk of even making fun of or further shaming the person who is already being shamed. People in narcissistic relationships often feel that they are the problem, whether it's your parent, whether it was your partner, you feel like you're the problem. Well, first of all, that happens because you're told you're the problem. But also because sometimes when we're in these relationships, we do take the bait. We do get pulled into angry arguments where we are not our best self, where we ourselves may become dysregulated because of the ongoing and escalated baiting. And you may yell or say some really angry words yourself. And when that happens, when we respond to these rage baiting stimuli, we feel bad. Pretty much like we're as bad as the narcissistic person in our life, that we are equally complicit. And sometimes you may even stick it to them, and you might even rage bait them. It happens. And as a result, a lot of people who are stuck in these endless narcissistic relationship loops often feel stuck because they feel like they've gone down into the abyss themselves. You've gone into the dark corners of the room too. It can take a long time to separate all of this out. And this is why understanding narcissistic relationship dynamics becomes so important. You may be wondering, isn't rage baiting a part of all relationships? I would argue no, absolutely not. It may happen once in the rarest of circumstances, but it's not a regular part of a healthy relationship. In healthy relationships, people don't go for the jugular. They don't sucker punch. They don't try to get someone agitated. In healthy relationships, when we are aware of someone else's vulnerability, we protect it. Or at a minimum, we don't go after it. And I'm fully aware that none of us are perfect. And even the healthiest among us, on our worst days, have rage baited. I almost think of it as a sort of a fight response thing. But the rage baiting is a much bigger problem in narcissistic relationships because it is a pattern. Just as you start healing and getting healthier, it may show up more because it does become that way to maintain dominance and control for them. It's a way to get a rise out of you when you're merely trying to protect yourself, not engage, and like I said, heal. So while rage baiting may be the word of the year, because content creators are competing for people's eyes, ears, engagement, attention, and money, it's funny how these words of the year keep coming back to what is happening to people in invalidating, antagonistic, narcissistic, and toxic relationships. It's a reminder that perhaps the reason that this whole narcissism situation feels worse to so many of us is because we are often more forgiving, excusing, enabling, rewarding, and frankly celebratory of narcissistic folks than we've ever been. I'm not convinced there's more narcissistic people. I just think we're throwing them more parades. Long after we forget that rage baiting is the word of the year, and there's a new word next year, people in narcissistic relationships will continue to be baited, rage and otherwise. When we see the rage baiting content on social media, online, wherever, the best thing we can do is to learn to not engage. And in our own smaller scale relationships, when we're in the presence of the rage baiting narcissistic person, same thing. We have to get back to grounding ourselves, radical acceptance, and an awareness that this is a thing they do. And they often escalate if you don't take the bait. So if you can somehow get past the storm of baiting and not take the bait and not engage, if you're lucky, they may simply just lose interest in you. And that is a good day. So somebody asked me about ghosting, okay? And the person they simply asked me, what is ghosting and is it always bad? I thought that was an interesting question because it made me think deeply about ghosting. So ghosting, the act of literally disappearing from someone's life, typically someone you've known from a while and typically abruptly, no longer responding to them or showing up in any way, not responding to messages, calls, emails, just going silent. By and large, people consider it a bad thing, an unsettling thing, a manipulative thing, and a sort of condition of the modern age where we are really so available to each other, at least electronically, if not in all the other ways. So for someone to disappear, especially if you've known them for a while, which is usually what ghosting means that they're really going out of their way to ignore you or be done with you. The woman asked me the question. I talked with her for a while, and she and I, by the time I was done talking with her, I realized there were about 5 kinds of ghosting we were talking about there. And I quickly, on the back of the envelope, sort of sketched it all out. And I realized ghosting is not as simple as a person disappearing. And it's not always this terrible thing to do. It might be. It depends on the kind of ghosting. But I think we have a pretty simplistic take on it, like we have a lot of these words. So the first type of ghosting we talked about is punitive ghosting. And punitive ghosting is just what it sounds like. It's punishing someone by no longer responding to them. It may honestly be like a shut down, mega silent treatment. But the punitive ghosting is like, it's to stick it to someone. I'll show you. You're going to do that. You're never going to hear from me again. And unlike the silent treatment, it's not like they are right there in front of you and not talking to you, right? They just disappear. Not for just a short time. I mean, ghosting is really like a long-term disappearance. But for a long time, perhaps even forever. Punitive ghosting isn't about safety seeking. We'll talk about that kind of ghosting in a moment, right? But it can be a bit of a very, very, very long-term tantrum. It's sort of like, I am no longer having anything to do with you. You'll see what that's like. The punitive ghoster may be mad at something you did or said or didn't say or didn't do. At some level, the punitive ghoster knows or believes that them disappearing is going to throw you off, right? You will now be anxious or worried or wonder what they went or feel abandoned. So to that degree, the punitive ghoster, this is a pretty manipulative play and a pretty powerful one. The punitive ghoster does not ever and is not willing to talk it out or have a conversation. They just completely disappear when things don't go their way and they don't like how someone behaved or didn't treat them the way they wanted. Now, while narcissistic people can and do punitive ghost, I gotta say they don't always, and people with narcissistic personalities are not the only people who engage in this punitive ghosting. Again, punitive ghosting is the adult breath-holding tantrum of ghosting. It's the child, like I said, who holds their breath until they pass out. And at some level, the punitive ghoster probably gets off on knowing people or the person that they've ghosted are all in a tizzy, wondering where they've gone. They've done it to stick it to the person. The second type of ghosting is, I'm going to call it game-playing ghosting, okay? Now, this is definitely, again, it feels like a riff on the punitive ghosting, but now the game-playing ghosting is definitely a narcissistic person's ground game. It can also be straight-up immaturity. Like I said, this is not punitive ghosting. It can be a few things. It can be disappearing for a long time, and then after quite a bit of time, like it could be years, then or many months, and then popping up again, claiming that, oh, my life just took all these turns. And then even gaslighting the person they ghosted, saying like, what's your problem? Like, why are you so needy? Like, okay, I needed my space. Game-playing ghosting can also be a manipulative play on someone's abandonment fears. Now remember, ghosting is not just going silent for a few hours or even a few days. The ghoster goes silent for a while, like I said, if not forever. Now, the game-playing ghoster may not respond through the usual channels to the person they're ghosting, but they may disappear for a long time and then show back up to test the waters, or they may be throwing out messages into the world via social media, but still not respond to messages or calls. So you know they're out in the world. You don't think they're dead, but they're not going to take your message. Now, the third form of ghosting her and I talked about is the I'm scared of you ghosting. And the argument is this even ghosting? There's some debate on this. Now, the I'm scared of you ghosting happens when a person is in a relationship. Now, this is a form of ghosting that can happen in a newer relationship, but not always. But a person's in a relationship with someone and they don't feel safe, and so they block the other person, or they don't respond to anything anymore because they actually are genuinely becoming scared, or they can't find a way to communicate with this person in a way that doesn't always blow up. Now, this could happen after a few weeks or months into a relationship, or even a few years in. This could happen because you may have tried to talk with this person over and over again, but every time you try to talk with them, or maybe you break up and make up and break up and make up, or you keep getting hoovered back in, or even suggest that this relationship is not working anymore, the relationship devolves into something sort of toxic and scary. And then when it becomes clear you just need to get away from this person, and you're like, nothing's going to work, and you know there's no more talking that's going to work, and it's just going to fall apart again, the I am scared of you ghosting can happen. I have to say that there are people who are in the throes of post-separation abuse from a harmful relationship who don't have legal ties, like minor children, to the person they want to have nothing to do with, or they just have to get out, or there's no legal connection. They have said to me that when they're like, I just stopped all contact, they've told me that they were described then down the line of being just as manipulative as a game-playing punitive ghoster. Like, how could you just disappear from someone's life? And then they were given the bad advice that you got to reach back out to that person and talk it out with them and have closure. Obviously, these were people who did not understand narcissism or coercive control or post-separation abuse. Now, remember, there is no closure in antagonistic narcissistic relationships. There is, at best, hopefully leaving with some shred of sanity and hope that you are not stalked for too long. But the I am scared ghosters often just cut contact and disappear because they just can't, they can't do it anymore. Now, the fourth kind of ghosting is the I am truly done with you ghosting. Now, this is different than the I am scared of you ghosting. The I am scared of you ghoster ghosts because they just don't know what else to do. They know that contact is going to get them roped into word salad, gaslighting, guilt, and other manipulations, as well as potentially rage or lies, just all kinds of general awfulness, right? And so the I'm scared of you folks say, I need to get away from this person. This doesn't feel safe. I feel like it can escalate. It can escalate. Now, the I am done with you ghoster is just plain done. They want nothing to do with the person that they have ghosted. Now, this is an interesting form of ghosting to me. Again, not sure if it's the right word. If it happens in a brand new relationship, 1 to 2 dates in, is it even ghosting? Now, I know some people argue yes. Like, you should say, like, we're done, we're good, bye. There has to be that moment. Others say no. I'm in the camp of no, because some people can't hear no. And so if you say, I don't want to be in touch with you anymore, they might kind of be stalky. Now, it can also happen after a longer relationship. Now, remember, ghosting doesn't happen after 2 people agree to break up. It's pretty abrupt by definition. Ghosting is like sort of a here today, gone tomorrow scenario. So this person may be someone you expected to see or hear from or would respond, and boom, they're done with you. Could also be that you're done with them. Now, in this form of ghosting, I guess this is where ghosting can feel lazy. But sometimes there is some overlap with the I am scared with you ghosting. Like this, again, these two kind of morph into each other. Or it could be with a person who may be experiencing some red flags with a new person. Like, I think if I tell this person no, they're going to get really aggressive with me. And they just want it to be done so it doesn't get weirder. So they just stop having any contact with them and they block any means of being contacted again. Now, sometimes people wouldn't call this ghosting because no substantial relationship has grown. So in this early phases. And this last form of ghosting I call trauma/grief ghosting. This last form of ghosting may happen because something happens to someone. Perhaps someone goes through an unexpected loss or significant trauma, a significant illness, and out of necessity, or just because they can't manage it, they cut out from the world. Like a person gets in an accident or in a hospital, they can't get in touch with people. It could also happen in a person with a history of trauma where closeness could feel overwhelming. And as the relationship starts getting closer, disappearing could be a response to increasing intimacy. With this form of ghosting, again, I don't even know that we'd use the word ghosting here, but if it is in response to a traumatic event in the ghosting person's life, if you will, the person who doesn't get in touch anymore, just about everyone in their life may be ghosted. But if you are not friends or family or close with other members of the ghoster's social circle, you may not know that they went silent on everyone because something terrible happened in their lives. If it is part of a trauma response, if, for example, you don't know the person's history, you may not understand why they just disappeared. Again, I don't know that the word ghosting here is probably the right one, but it is a disappearance, if you will. And once we understand what's going on, it feels less like an intentional ghost, but people may think they're being ghosted because ordinary messages about work and life, etc., are just not being responded to, and just the week before, they were. This is also challenging because the trauma or grief ghoster doesn't really, or illness ghoster, doesn't really mean to ghost. It's not a tactic. It's often the byproduct of a life that's under tremendous stress, strain, life falling apart, challenges with coping, wanting to isolate, traumatic associations to closeness and intimacy than it is with, again, the tactical action of ghosting per se. And as I said, we usually don't use the term ghosting here once we understand the circumstances. But until then, you may believe that you're being ghosted if someone sort of just disappears, and only later, when you learn the circumstances, do you recognize that it wasn't actually that. Unfortunately, we take the universal stand that all ghosting is cowardly, right? It's not. It doesn't feel good if it happens to you, especially if you care about the person who disappears. You may be surprised by it, hurt by it, and yes, sometimes ghosting is in fact cowardly, even punitive. But in some cases, the person being ghosted, especially if they lack self-awareness, may say, well, this person just disappeared from my life. They ghosted me. Yet, when we dig deeper, we see that they didn't just disappear, but rather there was time after time after time in the relationship that they attempted to talk to a person and they felt gaslighted, they felt they weren't heard, they were manipulated, and then it felt increasingly unsafe. And the other person just hits a wall and leaves. Is that ghosting? I don't know. So to call something ghosting, we do need context. Again, the unique nature of narcissism and the associated entitlement means that narcissistic folks kind of believe that they have a right to hear back from you, no matter how badly that they have behaved, even when it is too difficult, or maybe you need a minute, or you're a bit scared of them. So what's interesting is that the very group that is most likely to engage in manipulative ghosting when it suits them is often the quickest group to accuse others of ghosting them when they aren't available and do finally cut out because there were few other options. So all of this is to say, that long thought about ghosting because of the person who asked me the question, ghosting isn't as simple as disappearing. There's a lot of things that go into why somebody disappears and blocks someone from their lives, and it isn't always the same. Thanks again.